With regard to your accelerationist influences, I know that you were heavily influenced by Nick Land and by Moldbug as well. Do you think that accelerationism is not simply that the idea that I guess the machinations of capital and its sort of lifelike increasing attraction of resources, human resources to itself is not just an inevitability, but it's also something that should be either resisted or encouraged? Is there an element of human agency in your conception of acceleration? I know, sorry, that was a long
I sort of
question.
go back.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I go back and forth on that myself. I think that if the market, which is sort of a bad abstraction, and we shouldn't really just talk about the market. There is no the market, right? There's layers of markets and anti-markets, and there's human agency at every level of the market, and people sort of like vying for advantage, and things that are maybe really good from a strictly market perspective can be unviable for social reasons or for reasons of the ambition of individual actors there. I think that when it comes to like specific technological advances, things like, even something like AWS, like would we have cloud-based infrastructure if it weren't for Jeff Bezos making a very particular decision in sort of the mid-2000s about the way his company would scale and be structured? And I actually think the answer might well be no, because there were other approaches to scaling up. And before Amazon kind of like went through this long and painful process of building out AWS, everyone just built on-premises server clusters, and everyone had their own, on-site staff to manage these things. Sure, we could have gone into a cloud-based direction. Maybe the winds were blowing that way, but I think individual actors at the apex really can have an outsized influence on the direction of technological growth. That said, once a technology is loose, it never goes back in the box. Like if Amazon completely disintegrated, flew off the face of the earth tomorrow, we would still understand how to like cloud-based computing paradigms. Those are going nowhere. And now that we have it, anyone who doesn't use it is at a huge competitive disadvantage in almost every way. I could go stack up a bunch of servers in a warehouse somewhere and try to run my own server cluster and do my own hosting. Certainly there's people who do that. But if I start up and I want to, actually solve the business problems that I'm trying to solve, I do not want to solve all of those infrastructure problems. And so you can individually opt out of a technological solution, but as long as there's sort of an equilibrium where people who use it are able to outcompete those who don't, the technology will go on. So is there human agency with regard to accelerationism? I'd say the answer is yes, with some qualifications.
Okay.
The qualifications, yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so these questions can always be a little bit too overdetermined. One of the things to think about, though, is this idea of convergence, right? So, would AWS the AWS model have happened anyway? Because in a hypothetical world without a Jeff Bezos leading the charge, because it just sort of makes sense. And if you look at like the search space, right, of possible technologies, well, the ones that are viable in terms of a business model within that search space is smaller than the ones that are possible. And then on top of that, the ones that are discovered within that have to be smaller than the ones that are viable. And then even within the ones that are discovered, it's probably very unlikely that there would only be one or two or three that you could stumble upon that would be, possible, viable, and discovered. There could be many more And so it is always sort of an open question whether or not what we have is the only thing that could have happened, or if it would have inevitably ended up here regardless. So
Yeah.
You're not an explicitly political thinker, at least in your writing. I think there are political implications or political what do I want to say? There are political implications, and there are political I guess there are polemic angles that one could, I guess, political interpretations that one could have based on your writing itself. But of course, you're a fiction writer, and none of your work is explicitly concerned with those issues. But of course, I think anyone that's familiar with your work and who's a little bit aware of kind of the online spaces that you're coming out of knows that there are these sort of accelerationist ties and sort of esoteric references that are built into these things. And so how do you self-conceptualize your own politics? We've talked a little bit about who your influences are. And do you think that there is a problem right now, and I'll just make this about the right, with them not being forward looking enough? It seems to me, from my own experiences over the last few years, being around various different dissident spaces, talking to people both on the left and the right, that really there is a lack, and this is why I asked you about the positive vision. There is a lack of conceptualization of what the future should entail, and there is a broad, widespread sense that the options that are on the menu by the current political institutions and parties that we have, particularly here in the United States, are just totally nonsensical for our time. They don't make any sense. They don't resonate really with the generations that are coming up now. They're really an artifact of the mid-century, and it's clear that they're outdated and that they're no longer serving us. But what's not clear is what kind of new paradigms that we're going to be headed into the future. So first, do you have a explicitly, would you say, political orientation that's sort of embedded into your work? And then in addition to that, do you think that the various kinds of dissident spaces that exist online are beginning to sort of congeal around something that could look like a coherent offering for those that are preparing to kind of move into the next phase of, let's say, our political paradigms?
I'll answer your questions in reverse order. Do I see it congealing into like new paradigms in a positive direction? The short answer, unfortunately, is no, because what people, there's always been this tension. Even like, I mean, I remember back in 2013, the original sort of Moldbug fan club developed this whole trichotomy of orientations, which you may or may not have seen. And they described themselves as ethnic nationalists, techno-commercialists, and I always forget what the third one was, but basically they were Christian ones. Because you had like sort of Catholics coming in and going, oh, monarchy, I like that. And then you had these kind of post-libertarians coming in and saying, oh yeah, market solutions to governance, I like that. And then you had the ethnic nationalists who are sort of a dumpster fire. But, and me, the less said about them, the better, unfortunately. But the online right has this really divided sort of set of desires. They want two things that are perfectly contradictory. One, they hate technology on the whole. I mean, they use technology, haha, you're very smart, but they don't like it. They point to the evils. This is something I do in a sense of all the new technologies that come out. Communications technology is used as an instrument of mass control and mass demoralization, and it spreads all these horrible sort of lifestyle hazards, and they sort of hate sort of advances, with a few exceptions for things like space travel, which I won't start to shit on. And on the other hand, they want to live in a society where people are sort of smart and free and able to pursue like their own best perception of their interests. And what would happen if people live their life in that way is they would invent things, they would create new technologies. That's sort of one sign of flourishing, is that you have ingenuity and you invent. And they will simultaneously hold up the history, like the greatest figures of history as they see it, as people like who are inventors and thinkers and innovators. And we want to be in a society like that, and we also hate all the new technology that's coming out. And so you can't possibly reconcile these two visions. You can't live in wholly traditional ways while also constantly wanting to bring new technological development to the world. So if they are to congeal, it's not going to happen in this sort of morass of these two conflicting desires. As much as a synthesis of contradictions is often the way forward, it's going to take someone of a very singular character, really a leader, someone who does have a vision. And I'm going to say, I don't think that person is me as much as I'd like it to be, to sort of articulate that synthesis and drive them forward. But if you were to just take what we have now, there's no great showing point, and there's no single person who can really say what that vision would be. To go to your first question, I think I was actually doing some research on this myself. There is, I think you were referring to Thiel, where there's sort of these two doors of like the eco-future, where we all just kind of break away and go off grid. And then there's like this sort of techno-communist future where everything is just a total technological panopticon. And it's basically, you end up with the Borg from Star Trek, which is a point that I couldn't help but raise in exactly that way in my latest story. The thing is, both of these can exist simultaneously. And what will happen is that the techno-capitalist society and the eco-minimalist society can just coexist in the same space and really hardly even bother each other at all. They don't care. One of them is going to the stars, through effort with aspiration, and the other one is just sort of earthbound. I think it's like a phase shift. When water freezes, there's still liquid water around a lot of the time. When it evaporates, there's still liquid water. So you're talking about different phases of society. They can exist in simultaneity. There's not one future, there's many.